gonna be full with you? Let me move my stuff. I have more chairs coming down.
Just giving you a heads up when Rabbi lifts from the wheelchair that he's going to be speaking. He'll be speaking from there.
Okay. I will walk in. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
He's not first. No, I'm sorry. I just wanted to let you know.
Okay.
What happened? Sent you away?
No.
He sent you away?
No, it works.
Okay, so just you know what to focus on.
If it's easier to give them names, what I put on the YouTube, they can find it right away.
Yes.
Or you know what? Put my name, Semyon there, it will be easier. No, the same thing is fine. Yes,
Where?
YouTube.
YouTube, and how do you search for it?
You know what? If you have a pen, I will give you my name and you will go
Oh, okay, I'll
or
get my
telephone. You don't have a pen or pencil? M-Y-O-N. Lemel, there is T-E-R-E-D-I-D-A. And on YouTube, no. T-E. D-A.
Let's stop here. You move to the back.
Move.
Jetzt die Ehrenreich vertellen. Dame David, Shmenia ki chasisi bach, Amar Adonai Adonai Ata, Tevosi Bal Lecha, Doi Shemasher Baretzema, Vadire Kol Chetzivam, Yibra Tzvoi Samachim Aru, Baal Asir Nechzei Midam, Ubal Esra Shmoi Samach Suhasa, Adonai Minos Chelki V'choisi Hata Toimech Bereloi, Chavolem Nafel Bimanoi, Mach Nachas Svar Aloi, Avrechas Adonai Shayatzoni, Achleloi, Sisru Mikloi Sai, Shavisi Adonai Lenegdi Somen Ki Bimini Baal Lemoit, V'chein Samach Li B'Yogel Tvoi Diav, L'Sari Yishkon Levatach, Ki L'Isazim Nashu L'Shol, L'Sidin Chasid Chol L'Ois Shochas, Todin Yerechaim, Sevei Shmoch Oisas Panecha, Nimas B'Mincha Netzach. Yoishe B'Seitzel Yod Mitzel Shaddai Yislein Noinam V'Adoni Machsim Tzedosi Li'ayach Tachvoi Ki Yatzilcha Mipach Yokush Midever Avois V'Vroisa Yosef Loch V'Sachas Knof of Tetzah Tzino V'Seicheira Mitoi L'Sidim Mipach Eloila Mechetzio V'Yoimam U'Midever Boifa Ya'aloich Miketev Yoshet Tzarayim Yipum Mitzimcha Elech V'Rvova Mincha Elech Lo Yogosh Rak V'Nefes Sabit Bishul Maser Shom Tirek Yata Adoni Machsi Elyoin Sabta Meinecha Leisun Elecha Rov V'Negel Yikra B'Alecha Ki Melocha Gitzav L'Chol Ishmocha B'Chol Derechecha Al Kabayim Yesuncha Pendigoy V'Ever Aglecha Hashacha V'Fesen Tidroi V'Tirmois V'Firiv Samin Ki Vicha Shacha V'Teyo Askivek Yod Shmi Yikreini V'Nei Menoichi B'Tzorach V'Tzeivach V'Deyu Oyrech Yomim Asviyeyu V'Arei V'Shu Asi Shem Alois Yisonai Herveine V'Yezri Yezri V'Madeno Yosef Shemai Varetz Al Yitei Lamoit Raglecha Yen Shlemnecha Hine Lo Yom Lo Yishon Shoy Ma Yisrael Adonai Shemnecha Adonai Tzilcha Yadi Minecha Yoim Mashemesh Lo Yakecha V'Yereach B'Loilo Adonai Yishmarcha Mikara Yishmar Es Nafsho Yishecha Adonai Yishmar Tzeis Chorecha Mi'ata V'Yad Eilam the son of Ehrenreich.
You know, when you look around the world, you'll find most people eventually find a job, a way to make a living. And then you have a smaller number that find a profession where the work becomes a core part of their identity. But echad me'elef lo matzasi, you won't find 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000, the person that finds not a job, not a profession, but a calling. Where the man so perfectly matches the job, and the job so perfectly matches the man, they become an indivisible one, and the work ceases to be work, it becomes something else completely. It becomes a joy, it becomes a passion, and it becomes, in a sense, life itself. And my father was blessed in this world to have found his calling. And his calling, of course, was, I don't have to tell you, Beis Yaakov Borough Park. Now, my father began his connection in Beis Yaakov in 1955. I think that's 66 years ago. He went for an interview for the principal position of what then was a small school in a very different borough park. And the board told him they have good news and bad news. The good news is they liked him a lot. But the bad news was they thought he was too young. He was then still in his 20s. My father had a very good sense of humor. He responded, you know, if that's the only problem, I can promise you time will take care of it. And those words turned out to be prophetic, and they gave him the job. They must have liked his humor. And first, there was a job, and then it was his profession. He became an educator and a mechanech. But then slowly, imperceptibly, it became his calling. And he became Beis Yaakov, and Beis Yaakov became him. And I heard my father say more than 50 years ago in a speech that he made, maybe it was the first time he was honored at some Beis Yaakov dinner, one of many dinners. He said, Vayin ich vayin, live I live at 848 Lennox Road. I'm sorry, Schlaf, I always ruin that one. Schlaf ich schlaf, sleep I sleep, at 848 Lennox Road, of the Vayin ich vayin, live I live in Beis Yaakov of Borough Park. And that was a good encapsulation of his relationship to Beis Yaakov. And the Torah relates that when Leah gives birth to her 4th child, she says, Hapam, this time with the 4th child, Aidas Hashem, I will thank Hashem, and she calls the child Yehuda. And Rashi explains why the 4th time, what about the first 2 children? He says Leah made a calculation with 12 Shvatim and 4 Imos. She should have maxed out at 3 children. But now with her 4th child, she said to herself, Natalti Yaisa Mechelki. I took more than my fair portion. And I once heard my father be mazber that the essence of the midah of Haidah, the midah of thankfulness, is this Hagosha of Natalti Yaisa Mechelki. And I think of this Vart now because if I had to take in one sentence to encapsulate my father's view of his job, it was simply and sincerely, Natalti Yaisa Mechelki. I took more than my fair portion. In his mind, he was the luckiest, most blessed, most fortunate man to be the Menal of Beis Yaakov. And if you had offered him all the kesef and all the zav and all the shiny toys and trinkets that we chase in this life in exchange for his job, he would have laughed at you. And not because he didn't want to be rich, but because he already was rich. In his mind, he was always Natalti Yaisa Michalki. And for 40 years, or not 40 years, for more than 60 years, my father worked here in Beis Yaakov, I would say Lishma. And when I say Lishma, I don't mean that every morning he got into his car and said L'Shem Mitzvah Chinuch. No. I mean every single thing he did only L'Shem Beis Yaakov, L'Shem the Talmidot, L'Shem the staff, L'Shem the parents, and L'Shem the community. He had no other agendas in his life, and he never thought of or attempted to leverage his position, or as we say today, his personal brand, for any other purpose. And the Torah tells us by Moshe Rabbeinu, the Mechanech of Klal Yisrael, that loinas lecha, he never lost his freshness. And my father was blessed with his bracha of loinas lecha. He went to work in his 80s and 90s with the same enthusiasm, the same chiyas, the same pep in his step that he had when he was a younger man. And you know, if somebody finds a calling in life, that person is blessed. No matter what the calling is, it could be playing baseball or collecting stamps. But if a person finds a calling that enables him to make a difference and make a mark in the world, that person is, of course, so much more so blessed. And my father left a mark in the world. And if you're sitting here, you can do a back of the envelope calculation. Every year, 4 classes or more graduating, 65 years. Many of the students are already parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. You'll see there are probably more than 10,000 alumni in the world today. And of course, many of them already have large families of their own. So I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that my father has a chelik, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller, in thousands upon thousands upon thousands of beautiful Jewish homes that consecrated the foundations of their homes right here in Beis Yaakov of Borough Park. And my father was blessed not only to have a job he loves and to make a difference, but he was very successful in his job. And there are many benchmarks and metrics for measuring success. Some will talk about the education, some the problem solves, the administration, the buildings, and so on. But as time is limited, I want to focus on one metric which is personal to me and my family. And that is, since I'm a small child, till this very day, standing in the Bika Chayla room in my Maimonides, everywhere I went, I would say, people would say, I'd meet a stranger, they'd say, what's your name? I say, Ehrenreich. They stare at me, they look at me. Could you possibly be related to Rabbi Ehrenreich of Beis Yaakov? They usually look at me like I'm a third cousin. I say, yes, that's my father. And then it would start. Praise would just gush forth. I have no other word than gush forth. People just loved and enjoyed saying nice things about him. And that's an amazing thing. If you're in public life for more than 50 years and people don't say too many bad things about you, you're way ahead of the game. And if people feel the compulsion to say good things, to praise you, it's a tremendous siyata d'shmayin, a tremendous chut shel chesed. And my father was zeicha to the keser shem tov and a chut shel chesed. And I would like to just share with you one concrete story. It's a random story, but it's a true story. My wife and I were at Atlantic Beach, a place very far from Borough Park, both geographically and other ways. And we meet a woman. She's about my age. And we go through the routine. Ehrenreich, Rabbi Ehrenreich, boom, we're off to the races. Rabbi Ehrenreich this, Rabbi Ehrenreich that. And then she says, Rabbi Ehrenreich changed my whole life. He turned it around, and everything I accomplished in life, I owe to Rabbi Ehrenreich. And you know, I was listening with half an ear before that, but this caught my attention. I turned to her, I said, tell me, what did he do? She tells a story. She says, I was in 7th grade. I was a transfer student. I wasn't doing well. I wasn't adapting well. I was in a bad place. And I had words with the teacher. I said stuff to the teacher. The teacher said things to me. And the teacher says, chutzpah, go to the principal's office. So she tells me she goes to the principal's office. And Rabbi Ehrenreich comes in. And he tells her, okay, tell me what you're doing here. What are you doing here? So she relates the whole story, what she said, what the teacher said. And she tells me that Rabbi Ehrenreich was silent. He looked at me and I'm so nervous. And then he turns to me and he says, you know what? I've heard everything you had to say, and I agree with you. You were right. The teacher wasn't right in this case. And she said that affirmation that he gave me, that confidence that he placed in me, somehow turned around my whole life. So I don't know what this story means exactly, but all I know is a woman past 50 looking back on her life ascribes to one single conversation a transformative event in her life. And I would say my father had a special skill. He knew how to listen, and he knew how to empathize, and he knew how to say the right thing, whether to a pupil, whether to a teacher, a parent, whatever the situation, he knew the right thing to say. And when he was in the hospital, I asked him, to what do you attribute whatever success you had? And he was already weak, he couldn't give big speeches. He said, because I was able to listen. And my father had, I would say, a broad view of chinuch, what his obligation was to his talmidot. It wasn't just about aleph beis or ABC. And I'll tell you, probably some of you know this, when it came Pesach time, it's vacation time, he would raise money. For what purpose was he raising money? And I tell you, ordinarily, it had absolutely nothing to do with the finances of the yeshiva, never touched the finances. But came Pesach time, he would have a personal fund, he would raise money because he was concerned there were girls who could not afford to buy something new for Yom Tov. So he raised some money, he arranged with the store that any girl could come in and get something new for Yom Tov. I think it was shoes, but I may not be remembering exactly correctly. So, and as the years went by, as he went from being the mechanech that was too young to the Zakan HaMechanchim, the eldest statesman among the Mechanchim, his reputation for being a Chacham, a Bikeach, specifically and particularly with regard to things that relate to Chinuch, spread far and wide, and people would come from all over to seek his advice. And in his later years, his greatest joy was helping the next generation, and actually, if you think about it, it's 2 generations down already, of Mechanchim, to make a success. And before I go on, I need to make one correction or clarification. And that is, I may have given you the impression that Beis Yaakov in 1955 was my father's first position. But that's not the case. For a very short period of time before that, he was the assistant principal in a school which has been out of business for many decades, called Yeshiva of Brighton. And from where I stand in my perspective, it could be his short stay in Yeshiva of Brighton was more important than the ensuing 65 years in Beis Yaakov. And I say that because in that school, in the office, there was an office worker, and the students called this office worker Miss Levy. And I've met Miss Levy, and I call her Mommy. So my father, in his first job, was before the Shidduch industrial complex came into existence. There were no Shidduch resumes. He met his zivug, he met my mother in Yeshiva of Brighton, and my father often acknowledged, including in the hospital, that everything he accomplished was only because my mother was at his side and his support through his 65 plus years. And we used to have a plaque in our house, my father's office. There was a plaque. And this is only for the family. Everybody else doesn't have to listen to this, but the family will understand. The plaque used to say, behind every great man stands a woman. Behind every great man stands a woman telling him he's wrong. That's what the plaque said. So, my father was zeicha to be lucky in his career and job, and lucky in love, and lucky in work. So I would say, in conclusion, that today is our Tisha B'Av. We mourn our great loss, but it's also our Nachamu, because we take consolation and solace with the knowledge that my father lived a blessed life, a life full of love, and a productive life that allowed him to make a Rishima L'Dairos, an impact on the generations, and an impact that, God willing, will only grow as the generations go one after the other. And in this sense, I think we can say, Tzadikim b'misasam nikrim chayim, the righteous and deaf are called living. And as I conclude here, I'm reminded of something I heard more than 50 years ago. I was sitting in 11th grade, and I remember it like it was today. The Rabbi said, when you come to the Bezdin Shalmayla, when you come to the heavenly tribunal, they're not going to ask you, why weren't you Moshe Rabbeinu? Why didn't you become Moshe Rabbeinu? They're going to ask you, why didn't you become yourself? Meaning, why didn't you use your God-given potential to its maximum extent? And that's a very tough question, and maybe even a frightening question. But I'm confident that my father, Usher Lemel ben Yitzchak, Asher Halach Elamai, is that rare individual in the world who became exactly and precisely who he was supposed to be. Should be a Melitz Yeshua, Bila Bavas Netzach.
Rav Rabbi Yaakov Horowitz, Rosh Yeshiva Beis Meyer, Vater Rabbanan Beis Yaakov.
שהצדיקים הייתם שופלון בכל דור ודור. Rabbi Shloim hat gesehen, als die spezielle Menschen, welche dürfen sein, die welche belachten ador, die welche helfen ziehen, mechanisch sein ador, sie tun sehr winzig für sie. Schoslon, es ist eine Teile gewesen, angepflanzt, bechol dör und dör. Der Duschen bechol dör und dör ist ein bisschen schwerer. Man kann auch sagen, Schoslon, bechol dör. Das ist der dör und dör. Schoslon, bechol dör und dör. Es ist vorhanden, aber sindere Indien, was wir so kennen, sahen die Brick, der Megasche, von ein Dörr zur zweiten Dörr. Jede Dörr ist ein Dörr näher zu Kabbalah Sateure. Der Dörr ist ein näher zu Kabbalah Sateure. A Sache warmer zu Teure. A Sache tiefer, sinniger, versteindig, was Teure, was Beuräulung will. Kennen kommen in das Megasche sein und machen näher. Speziell, wenn sie wird, Hefseikes von ein Dörr zur zweiten. Wat genommen bechol deur, du bechol deur, wo deur die Jiden, welche kennen, zusammennehmen, von ein Deur zur zweiten, gedenken, wo sind gewähnte Males, wo hat man Gesicht, wo ist Ehrlichkeit, wo ist Jiddischkeit, wo ist der Mitte des Teufels, und das rüberbringen von ein Deur zur zweiten. Der politische Ruf, Zechel Levruche, Dann hat gegangen machen Ponevisch. Ich komme zu gehen, jeden haben gesucht. Die meisten Geist aufbauen, du hast ein Dorf in Goinen, Tzadikim, Rabbunim, Rosh Hashivas, Maschkichim. Chazal sagten, steigt, Eilef Lechlusim, 1000 welche gehen heran, es kommen heraus, Maya, Lemikre, Asura, Mishna, Eichot, Jöitze, Leuru, es ist einer von 1000, das wächst aus. In die Meister, die kennt der Recht schon 1000 für 1000. Und die politische Ruf geöffnet. Sie halten jetzt bei Lucha Mulchuma, mit der Mulchuma. Sie wird ausgehalten geht, 1 Million jüdische Kinder. Mit der Wegnehmen des Solteres Schamna von Klal Yisrael, geblieben ein paar zerbrochene alte jüdische Beine. Sie wird durch kennen Mechanisch sein, sie wird durch kennen Blien, sie wird durch kennen existieren teure. Aber in der Chatebe seht es nicht Schluss. Aber, sucht der politische Ruf, wir haben auf Tuche. Und Rabbi Shimon ben Yechuy al-Radlov, Chas v'Shulam lo tishtakach teure mi Yisrael, shenema ki lo yishuchach mi Pizarro. Teure wird nicht vergessen werden. Teure bleiben lo ilam wo teures Nitzchies, wir haben auf Tuche. Sucht der politische Ruf. Kol Zman Menschen sind die Mechanich mit Dörre von normalen Öfen. Ist du a Seide von Kiloisisch, was soll dann 11 Lechnussen für Eichot Jöitze. Wenn sie kommt oder als Mann wussten, auf die Derech hat nicht du ka 11 Lechnussen, sind nicht du ka Meier Lechnussen, sind du an Aftuche für Leute Schuchach mit Pizarro. Wenn wir gleich mit der Stuche, mit Boot Teure, mit Boot Jüdischkeit, mit Boot Yerushalayim, mit Boot Ahavas Hashem, mit der Haftuche von Leute Schuchach, mit der Haftuche von Leute Schuchach, können wir sagen, 11 Lechnusse bei 11 Jöitze. Der Ehrenreich von Levayah hat ungeheuer mal bis Yankiv mit die Eltern, die sind gewähnt, Kazetlikes, Lagerjiden, mit die Kinder, die sind geboren geworden dadurch, mit die Kinder, die auf sei gewähnt, Haftuche von Leute Schuchach. Ich will mir Sie gesehen in unserer Dörr, ich bin für den Dörr später, wenn Sie mir nicht von dem Dörr, was Rabbi Lemel gewähnt. Hat doch gesehen, ein Dörr von Pfarrer Malchuma. Hat doch gesehen, die Jiden von früher. Hat doch gewiss, was sie wird zu nehmen. Ich bin ein Jita Talmud Ruchem. Ich finde das macht schon hier noch. Gewiss, was sie wird zu nehmen, was sie wird zu geben. Gesehen, heilige Augen. Ungeheuben mit der Tuche von Leute Schuchach. Dann haben wir kicken zurück und wir sehen handige Probleme. Kids at risk, falling through the cracks. Verschiedene. Lechoire wollten jenem Mann, was Eltern haben nicht verstanden, was Amerika ist. Sie haben nicht gar kein Scheiches zu wissen, was der Kinder von den Kindern ist. Kaum sie haben gehabt andere Yechiden, sie haben gehabt Eltern, zu wählen, zu fragen, zu reden, Ribbe, das auch nicht. In Chazdi Hashem, die Probleme sind gewählt. Kartinien, die in Efscher. Wenn es das Gebot teure mit Leute Schuchach, damals hat die Kinder sagen, 11 Lechnussen, 11 Jöitze, es sind nicht gewähnt diese Probleme, es sind gewähnt andere. Es ist auch durchgegangen, ein paar Dörres. Es ist auch durchgegangen, ein paar Jahre, es ist schon nicht gewähnt, die Eltern. Sie sind zugekommen zu einer normalen Welt, also geriefen. Und es hat sich ungeheuben, die normalen Probleme. Was darf man haben, 20 Maschgiche mit 1000 Augen. In Asach, Siata de Shmaya, in Asach, Chochma. Am Mittel kennen mich alles an der Dörr. Rabbi Lemel ist durchgegangen, den Mann. Hat ungeheuben mit Chanech zu sein von der Leute Schuchach. da durchgegangen im Vater. Und später die Gedäuris, die Mechanik zu sein, Kinder, mit anderen Sort Problemen. Andere Sort in Visions, was haben gehabt, was haben Gesicht, was man gewollt. 1000-mal verkehrt übergedreht in die Herzchristenischen, in der Rajones, in der Nationes sind geworden gut anders. Wie meuredig ist der Keuch für einen Mensch, der soll sich kennen, mittauschen und verstehen, als man verstehen Deures, verstehen, wie überzugeben von einer mutigen Dörr, und verstehen, aber man darf täuschen dem Kollier von Dörr zu Dörr, als soll ausgeben anders, als soll kennen sein, man soll kennen der Herr. Demselben Keulkeure beim Midbar, mit einem anderen Ton, mit einem anderen Chinnach, zu jedem Dörr und nicht vielen, ich bedachte doch ungern mit dem Alten. Man kann nicht gewähnen, in einer Höhe 10.000, 15.000 Sprüches. Wie viel von seinen Keuches liegen in hinderten Öfter, Tausende über Teure, was wollten anders nicht als ausgesehen, was wollten anders nicht geführt als alle heimische jüdische Stiebe. Usher, Chelke, der Rabbi Schleuren, Kloptos, und dieses Schafteln, bechall Dörve sollen kennen, in Ausführen Asam in heilige Schliches. Asam in spezielle Schliches. Ein Schliches, was nicht ein Gerät sagt, Sibben. In eine Hörer aufzubauen, als einen riesigen Mäuse, weil die ein Hörer, da habe ich so helfen, warte, bis mich hier kriegen. Da können wir wegstellen, als Huma Scheiches, mit Bechanches, mit den Teachers, mit den Menahelos, und mit den Yechides, die Gedenken, tausende Kinder beim Nummern, Juden später, weil hat ein Scheiches und ein Interesse. Ein Interesse in jedem Kind. Ein Interesse, dass jeder Kind soll können auswachsen. Aber was ist so? So können auswachsen, da wegzustellen, der jüdische Stieb. Die mit des Todes. Spezielle mit des Todes. Man scheich ist gewähnt, du speziell. Wenn es nach Rippe gegangen, ein bisschen mit der angenehmen Frank, als Assistent zu sagen, wir sind nicht stark. Normal wird man sagen, sie wird ein bisschen älter. Wie der Mann früher in Ostleicher jener gegangen mit dem Film schwingt, bis, du letztens. Wie das Kind einander, sie du ein bisschen nicht auf die Pusche. Nicht auf die Pusche. Heranzulegen, kol koiche im Oinoi, als Silsam behatzluche. Und dann überzugehen mit allem, mit allen Pictures, die in jedem Platte Brat. Die gewaltige Mitte des Teufels, was sie da drehen. Das ist als Usher Rabbi mit Mespalgen. Giftet er schon und Kind, und kein Riches auf dem Busse. Ich soll weiter. Ich soll sagen, du soll kennen gehen, für Riach, schon Kollechet, Veichet. Und Singe hatte Kinder, und Singe hatte Deures. Und das hat gewollt, und das hat mit Zlich gewählt. Wie viel hat man Zlich gewähnt von der heimlichen Stiebe? Und wie viel hat man Zlich gewähnt in der Heutzi Juka mit Säulen? Von Stiebe, von Haser, was sie gewähnt, zerbrochene Haser, schwache Haser. In dem Geduld, bis rauszunehmen mit dem Juka. Wir können sehen, wegzustellen, wie hoch er jüdische Stieb. Auf das Chaim, auf der ältere Jürgen, gewollt von Gretz Rabbi hat sich gebeten, wenn er so noch bleiben, Hitlerwitz. Sucht dich auf das Chaim. Amul hat gekannt retten, Amul hat gekannt dienen. Aber jetzt, kennt schon nicht, der rutschte Keuches, kennt nicht der Rosgei. Kennt nicht die Zeige sein. Von wo soll nicht sagen, die Jürgen hat sich so. Und Rabbi hat ihm geantwortet, als Mann der Seite sitzt beim Tisch, führen sich auf die Kinder anders. Als Mann der Seite sitzt beim Tisch, die denkt, bin ich Akesha mit der Amur. Du gewinn eine Seite, was hat getan, aber sie gewinn eine Seite, was sie gesessen am Tisch. Sie hat gewinn ein ganzer Staff, was hat gedenkt und gewiss, Rabbi Ehrenreich. Rabbi Ehrenreich hat das so gesucht und hat das so gesucht. Der Chuchem ist gewinn. Der Mechanich ist gewinn. Sie alle haben gewiss, dass sie sind, es ist ein Wort, das andere gewinn, ein Achaf Klim, zum gewiss die Luft zu gehen. hat angelegt die Kirche des Vaters. Im Staff, der Frank, sozusagen gesagt, speziell. Der Eibischte wird helfen. Aber es ist schon immer der Meshamash. Und sehen, was soll ungehend Vater sein kann, was hat gepflanzt, was hat der Teil gewählt. Die Ziele, so können rübergehen, Vater und Vater bis Mashiach-Stück. Das Chissen, was hat, was nimmt mit sich, uns nicht kamissig. Das Chissen sollen ungehend Vater für jüdische Kinder, für jüdische Hase. Und der Eibischte helfen, Billah Hamuvas Lanetzach, Nuchu Hashem, Lekim Dimon Al-Kapuna, Wule ziehen Goy.
The son of Robert Naftali Ehrenreich.
The truth is that my father mentioned to me a few years ago when he was about to undergo a procedure. So he said, you know, you never know what's going to happen. So let me give you some instructions. So he said the Levayah should be by the Yaakov. And Baruch Hashem, we were able to be Mekayim his wishes. The other thing he mentioned to me was that there should be no Hesped, because they're going to exaggerate. So I consulted my Rav, and he said, no, you have to have Hesped, but be careful, don't exaggerate. So I will tread carefully according to the wishes of my father, and I won't exaggerate. But would it be an exaggeration to say that all these Nashim Kaniyas, that you have nothing to do with it? Would it be exaggeration to say that people didn't love you? Would that be an exaggeration? As my brother mentioned, wherever I would go, and someone would hear that my father's Rabbi Ehrenreich, yes, their face would light up, but I'm not exaggerating. It happened again and again and again. Reb Shimon Eimishlosh Iksorim Heim, Kesa Kavuna, Kesa Malchus, Kesa Toy, Kesa Shem Toy, and Kesa Shem Toy Oilal. Because you could have a Kesa Toy, Kesa Kunakam, Kesa Malchus. It's not worth anything if you don't have the Neimas, the Avas Abriyas, Midas Taivas. It's not an exaggeration to say that my father was able to Kesa Sheikh Toiv. It says in Pasuk, Baruch mi bonim Usher, Yehidu Tzuyecha. The Gazakanim teaches, Shekol habonim yivachu, Baruch mi bonim Usher. All the sons should bless him. All the sons should bless Usher. Why? Yehidu Tzoyecha. Ibn Ezra says that Tzoy means he was beloved. And Rashi brings down, why was Usher so beloved? Because his daughters were beautiful, and they married Kahanim Gedolim, they married Talmidei Chachamim, Malchus. Would it be an exaggeration to say that they had no chelik in Torah in America? Didn't your Talmidas marry into the Chashivs, the Rosh Yeshivas, Magidei Shir? It's not an exaggeration to say that you had a chelik in that. When I was in the hospital, I would keep on getting calls out of the blue. This woman and that woman says, I want Rabbi Ehrenreich to have the best care. Call this doctor, and then I would have doctors coming and say, we keep on getting calls that we should do something. The patient representatives came in. They say, we keep on getting calls, we should do something. Who do you think was calling these people? It was all the Noshim Tzidkaniyas that you had a chelik in raising up. So I just want to share a few memories. One of my earliest memories is living in a house that was full of Sfarim. My father loved Sfarim. And it sort of became a family joke, my father has this obsession with Sfarim. And if you go up to the office in Beis Yaakov or Borough Park, you'll find the overflow of his home overflowed into Beis Yaakov. But let me tell you something, when you grow up in a house that's full of Sfarim from when your earliest youth, you know what's important to you.